Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, or good night. At whatever time you join us, again, I want to welcome you to this another study of the Bible. Last week, we studied about Cain and his generation. This week, we will continue. Now, if you remember the end of last week, we actually talked a little bit about Seth. That was Genesis 4, verse 25 and 26, where it said that Seth came to replace Abel. If you remember, Cain had followed after the devil in his actions, and his generations continued down that path. So, starting from chapter 5, it says, "This is the book of the generations of Adam. In the day that God created man, in the likeness of God made he him. Male and female created he them, and blessed them, and called their name Adam, in the day that they were created." Now, here it goes into just saying he called their name Adam. As you continue through the Bible, you'll find that the male name or the male dominance continues through the Bible. Now, if you remember the wages of sin for Eve, she now became somewhat subservient to her husband. That was the curse that was given to Eve. Now, as you continue through the Bible again, you will find that there is somewhat of a male dominance. Not that the woman is less than the man or means less to God, but that's just the consequence of sin, that the hierarchy that God allowed or put in place after sin. And so in this text, it says that they were called Adam. But if you remember when we studied, it was Adam and Eve. He made them male and female. It says, "And Adam lived 130 years and begat a son in his likeness, after his image, and called his name Seth. And the days of Adam after he begotten Seth were 800 years, and he begat sons and daughters. And all the days that Adam lived were 930 years, and he died." Now, you're going to find out as we continue to read through Genesis 5 that it will tell you when the first son was born. And then it will also tell you how long the person lived after the son was born. And it will make statements that they begat sons and daughters. But the only name that was given was that of the first son. So here it says that Adam had Seth and lived for a while. He had other sons and daughters, but those came after the years, of course, where he had his first son. And then it ends by saying he died. And that's also something to keep in mind. He died. Verse 6, "And Seth lived 105 years and begat Enos. And Seth lived after he begat Enos 807 years and begat sons and daughters. And all the days of Seth were 912 years, and he died." Continue to listen to the tone of exactly what I'm trying to tell you. It tells you when the first son, the name of the first son is also given, and then it tells you how long the person lived. It will mention that they begat sons and daughters, which were not named, but then it also ends by he died. "And Enos," in verse 9, "lived 90 years and begat Canaan. And Enos lived after he begat Canaan 815 years and begat sons and daughters. And all the days of Enos were 905 years, and he died. And Canaan lived 70 years and begat Mahalalel. And Canaan lived after he begat Mahalalel 840 years and begat sons and daughters. And all the days of Canaan were 910 years, and he died. And Mahalalel lived 65 years and begat Jared. And Mahalalel lived after he begat Jared 830 years, and begat sons and daughters. And all the days of Mahalalel were 895 years, and he died. And Jared lived 162 years, and he begat Enoch. And Jared lived after he begat Enoch 800 years, and begat sons and daughters. And all the days of Jared were 962 years, and he died. And Enoch lived 65 years and begat Methuselah. And Enoch walked with God after he begat Methuselah 300 years and begat sons and daughters. And all the days of Enoch were 365 years. And Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. So let's stick a pin right here. It tells us of the generations of Seth coming down. And as it tells us again the first name, and there's a reason for that, and I'll point that out to you. And then it tells you how long they lived, but it specifically ends with, and they died. In verse 24, it says that Enoch, he walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. Now, there's a lot of things that one can speculate or think, but the point is that Enoch did not die. As a matter of fact, a little quiz question. If I say to you, who is the oldest man that ever lived? Many people will say, it's Methuselah. Methuselah was Enoch's son, as we will continue to read that. But the answer is Enoch. Why? Because Enoch never died. Because God took him. God took him because he walked with God. In walking with God, it meant that he studied God. He had a relationship with God. He did what God said, and God took him. Methuselah now. Verse 25. And Methuselah lived 187 years and begat Lamech. And Methuselah lived after he begat Lamech 782 years and begat sons and daughters. And all the days of Methuselah were 969 years, and he died. So the oldest man that ever died was Methuselah. 969 years. The oldest man that ever lived was Enoch, his father. He lived to be 365 years on this earth, and God took him. That's just a trivia question, that you can think on as you continue to study. Then it goes now, verse 28. And Lamech lived 182 years and begat a son. And he called his name Noah, saying, This same shall comfort us concerning our work and toil of our hands, because of the ground which the Lord hath cursed. Now, as we continue to read, you'll find that there is something interesting about what is going to happen. The Lord has cursed the earth. Noah, it says, was to be a comforter. Verse 30, and Lamech lived after he begat Noah 595 years and begat sons and daughters. All the days of Lamech were 777 years, and he died. Verse 32, and Noah was 500 years old, and Noah begat Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Now, the difference with Noah is that it didn't tell us how old Noah was before he had his first son. It basically said Noah lived 500 years old. He was 500 years old, and he had three sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Now, how can we break this down to basically tell us or get the essence of what all of this is telling us? First, we realized it was Cain and Abel. Abel was following what God says. Cain didn't like it. Cain wanted to make his own rules. God says, give me this. Cain says, no, I'm going to give you that. God did not accept what Cain was offering, so Cain got upset because God did show respect unto what Abel did, because that's what God had asked for. The wages of sin is death. There was a sacrifice of an animal that was needed. So Cain rose up and slew his brother Abel. God caused Adam and Eve to have another son, Seth, who was now going to be the child of promise, the one who the truth was going to come through. What we've read today is simply the generations of Seth. It spent time, the Bible writer Moses spent time to identify the first sons of each generation. Adam, his first son, of course, was Cain, and we dealt with that. But Cain was not going to be heir of God's promise. He chose not to be. He chose not to follow God. So the first one that came up was Seth. Now, Adam stands for man. He was the original man. That's who God created. Then you had Seth, appointed. That's the name of, that's the meaning of his name, appointed. He became the one that was appointed, the one that actually was to bring forth the seed that was going to be the one that offered himself as a lamb for the sins to forgive us of what we were guilty of. He was going to be the Savior. So the Savior was going to come through that line. Seth's first son was called Enosh. Enosh. So man was Adam. Seth, appointed. Enosh stands for mortal. Then Enosh had Kenan. Kenan stands for sorrow. So man, appointed, mortal, sorrow. Mahalalel stands for the blessed God. So if you put it and put some adjective or addition to it, it says man is appointed, mortal, sorrow. But Jared now, and I say but Jared, says shall come down. That's what Jared stands for. Enoch stands for teaching. Enoch walked with God, and when you understand what Enoch did, he studied and he observed, and he was, there's no man that is perfect, but I would say that if anyone that was close to being perfect, it would be Enoch. The only perfect person that walked this earth we know is Jesus Christ himself. But Enoch apparently pleased God. The Bible doesn't get into a lot of details of exactly what Enoch did, but what it does say is that Enoch walked with God, pleased God, did what was right, and God took him. Enoch stands for teaching. Through Enoch, you can understand that he taught all the generations. And in today's day and age, if you get to 4 generations, that's a challenge. Most people know their grandma, but to know your great-grandma or even your great-great-grandma. But back in those days, when you add up the timeline of which these people lived, you realize that for generations upon generations upon generations, all were in existence at the same time. So Enoch taught. And when he reached the age of 365, he had reached a state of such perfection that God took him. Again, you could use that to do all different types of theology. There's a question about when we die, do we go straight to heaven? Well, the Old Testament doesn't teach us that people die and go to heaven. Enoch walked with God and God took him. Moses, Moses died, and when you get to Titus says that, the devil presented himself to argue with God about the body of Moses, and God raised him. Then you remember, as you get into some of the New Testament, it talks about the elders, that when Christ was raised, there were certain tombs that were open, and we'll get to that in later studies. But all the other patriots, all the other ones that were listed, they died. Enoch had Methuselah. That was his first son. Methuselah lived to be 969 years. And there is something about Methuselah. Methuselah's name says his death shall bring. When Methuselah died, it brought the flood. Now we haven't gotten to that because that starts in the next chapter. But again, when you look at the names and the meaning, man is appointed, mortal, sorrow, but the blessed God shall come down teaching. Then his death shall bring, that was Methuselah. Methuselah had Lamech. Lamech stands for despairing. His death shall bring the despairing. Now Lamech's son was Noah. The difference when you read and look at what it does with Noah, it doesn't tell you about Noah's first son. It just gives you that Noah lived to be X amount of years and he had 3 sons. So you find that there is a meaning to the names that were given, and the Bible identified it, also basically giving you somewhat of a prophetical view of what would happen. Because the flood was going to be a starting over. And again, I don't want to get before myself, but just so you understand that the names mean something. You know, I did something very interesting today. I looked up under Google the names of the generations that we currently have. Now, there wasn't a lot of generations that we identified going forward, but upon recent years, you've heard of the baby boomers. Now, the baby boomers, that's from 1946 to 1976. And that collectively, there are certain traits and things that are, placed upon them or within that group. You know, certain things as physicians we look out for. Baby boomers. Then you had the millennials, also known as Generation Y or Gen Y. 1965 to 1995, that's the time period they give themselves. Then, surprisingly, we now have what we call the Gen Zs, Generation Z. And the reason why that's interesting is because so many things are telling us that this earth isn't going to last much longer. There's a combustion that is happening. Churches are preaching that we're in the last days, even though sometimes they're not able to explain what do you actually mean by the last days. Science is telling you that something is occurring because with the heat wave and the global warming and the death of all different types of species that were created in the Garden of Eden and the lack of variety and all the different things that are happening. Science is saying that this earth cannot continue like this. But then interestingly, even the names of the generations, we're now in the Gen Z. Is it possible that just like how the names led up to a judgment that occurred on the earth, we are now just awaiting another judgment? As we continue to study the Bible, you'll find that it gives us insight into our everyday life and actually what we're doing, what is going to happen. If only you will study with the understanding, search the scriptures, because when you finish, it'll all come together like a puzzle, and you can be a part of the next generation. When heaven and earth pass away, when God calls his chosen home, we will continue to study. Thank you. Stay with me.